Denver Broncos just released Caden Sterns, and I'm here to talk all about it. But before I get into it, just want to say leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe if you're not already. This is my first video on this channel, so I hope you guys can stay. Hopefully you leave a like and subscribe, and let's get right into it. So let's talk about the Denver Broncos big news of the day. The big news of the day for the Broncos was that they did end up releasing safety Caden Sterns. And I think this was a big surprise to a lot of people just due to the fact that Caden Sterns was someone who came into the NFL and he was drafted out of Texas and he fell in the draft due to injury concerns. But over the past few years, it seemed like he had kind of found a home with the Denver Broncos. It seemed like he had kind of really found his groove in the NFL, at least while he was on the field. But unfortunately, he just could not become a mainstay on this team just due to the fact that he was always injured. And despite being a fifth round pick, he was a very athletic player. 9.59 relative athletic score, 4.41 40-yard dash. And I remember after his freshman year at Texas, people were mocking him as an early 2021 top 10, maybe even 15 pick in the entire draft. So that shows you how high the expectations were for a guy like Caden Sterns, and especially after his freshman year when he was, I believe, the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. And the Broncos, they had been looking to fill their third safety role for years. They had tried with some other solutions. PJ Locke truly hadn't broken out yet, but they were looking for that guy to take steps up next to Kareem Jackson and next to Justin Simmons at the time. So Jackson was obviously assigned in 2019 after the team had moved on from Will Parks, and they were just expecting somebody within the locker room to take a step up. They also drafted another fifth-round safety, I believe. Jamar Johnson, was that his name? Yes, in the very same draft. So they were looking at a bunch of guys and seeing what they could do and what they could become in the NFL. And this was a team that was always looking to add to the secondary. You know, the identity of this team has been defense. Even though they haven't really been good over the past 7 to 8 years, one thing that has kind of been consistent with this team is the defense has always been very passable. And Caden Sterns, he played 14 games in 2021, and a lot of people thought he was on track to becoming a really good starter in the NFL. He made some big plays. I remember he intercepted Zach Wilson in the Broncos' first game back with the fans after COVID against the New York Jets in 2021. He played in 5 games in 2022, got a nice interception off of Matt Ryan, and then after that, he didn't play the entire rest of the season, and then he missed all of 2023. So those injury concerns that he came out of Texas with were validated by the fact that he couldn't stay on the field. And he was informed by the team today that he will not come back. And I think this was a situation where the team ultimately wanted to do him right. And we have heard about that over the past few years with guys like Randy Gregory, with guys like even Justin Simmons earlier in the offseason. It sounded like he wanted to actually play for a contending team. So the Broncos, they have received marks in with former players for being able to move on in that regard as well. So what kind of player was Sterns? So he was a very versatile free safety and strong safety. His size allowed him to kind of be used as a hybrid, but ultimately he was more of a free safety. And unfortunately for him, he was just stuck playing behind Justin Simmons. But when he did get a chance to play strong safety, he was also very, very passable as well. He was never going to be a guy that you were going to, match on man coverage or anything like that. But ultimately, he had the athleticism to play anywhere in the secondary. And once again, I alluded to the fact that he had picked off Zach Wilson. He picked off Dak Prescott in the Broncos' absolute clubbing of the Dallas Cowboys in 2021 when they went into Dallas and won 30-16. He also picked off Matt Ryan in that Thursday night disaster. And he sacked Lamar Jackson twice. And I think that's one of the things that got people really excited about him was we were just like, okay, he's a third safety who has found a role on this team, and that's absolutely fantastic. So that's good. So why did they release Caden Sterns? Well, they would not do this for no reason. Peyton's seat is pretty, if it's not hot right now, I would say it's getting very, very warm just due to the fact that this team has not had that much talent over the past few years. And hey, if you're going to trade for Russell Wilson, by all means, go ahead and do it. But ultimately, your draft picks are a resume, and draft capital and investment into a player means you do not want any of your lukewarm picks to fail, especially for a GM that is on the hotter seat in the NFL. But Sean Payton, he is kind of undoing a lot of the mistakes that were done by the previous Broncos regimes. He's undoing a lot of the mistakes done by John Elway after the Broncos won Super Bowl 50. He's undoing a lot of the mistakes made by George Payton early on in his tenure with the Denver Broncos. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Peyton's tenure has been entirely bad for the Denver Broncos. He did draft Baron Browning. He did draft Patrick Surtain. He did draft Quinn Miners. But ultimately, I think he has really failed at building the rest of this roster. But the best ability is availability. There's been way too many missed games the past 2 years for Caden Sterns, and there's more guys standing out in training camp that make the Broncos feel comfortable moving off of Sterns. In particular, guys like J.L. Skinner. In particular, guys like Devon Key is a guy who you've really heard, Sean Payton rave about, and just a lot of Broncos beat reporters say, hey, keep an eye out for this guy. He could be our safety version of Alexander Johnson, so that's pretty cool. But one thing you have to realize is that safety is now a question mark with Jones hurt. Obviously, you know that PJ Locke is probably going to be the other starter at safety, but it's one of those positions where if they don't have a young guy step up, they kind of, I don't think they're going to be looking very good on the other end of this, especially if Caden Sterns goes somewhere and balls and Justin Simmons goes somewhere and balls as well. Now, maybe Justin Simmons doesn't want to come back to the Broncos, even though he is one of the best humans that Denver has ever had on and off the field. Maybe he is refusing a reunion with the Broncos just due to, some other things. And hey, I wouldn't entirely blame him. They did not win a single thing while he's been there. And he said that one of his biggest regrets was not being a part of a team that was immersed in a winning culture. And ultimately, I think that was tough for Simmons to deal with, especially because in 2016, the Broncos went 9-7 and still had Super Bowl aspirations, despite the fact that they were losing a lot of talent that incoming offseason. And their offense was the unit that let them down that year, and the defense was still really, really good. So safety is now one of the big question marks on this roster. You think about the question marks on this roster, you think about cornerback 2, you think about the inside linebacker 2 spot, and honestly, maybe inside linebacker 1 is one of your concerns, because Singleton, you may or may not think that he's a Jag, but if Singleton continues his play from 2023 into 2024, he will be on a different team in 2025. He's just a reliable veteran presence at this point, and I know I'm just kind of rambling, but there are a lot of questions on this roster. That's what I'm trying to get at, and the staff, they have a lot of work cut out for them in training camp in determining these position battles, and Sean Payton has said it all offseason. They want to get down to the right 53, and the fact that they released Caden Sterns before the preseason game, that really says a lot. Maybe he just didn't look that good coming back from injury. Maybe he just didn't, mesh well with what the Broncos wanted to do back there in the secondary, especially because Parker is no longer there as their defensive backs coach. So entirely new defensive backs coach, entirely new regime, entirely new system for him that he has not played in the NFL yet. Now I know Vance Joseph does run a very similar scheme to what the Broncos were running in 2022 and 2021, but ultimately, still, it's just the jury's still out on what Caden Sterns will be in the NFL once he moves on from the Denver Broncos and once he's able to get a new job. So what's next for Caden Sterns and what's next for the Broncos? So I think they ultimately do bring in a safety. This team is just way too young and way too inexperienced for, I think, the coaching staff to feel good about the safety position going into the week 1 against Seattle. Now, if they go into week 1 against Seattle without adding into that safety position, that will be a huge testament to what they feel about these safeties that are currently on their roster, the guys that are currently showing out in training camp. So ultimately, I think they do bring in someone. And I hope that Caden Sterns does sign elsewhere, because just because he's not a part of Broncos country anymore doesn't mean I don't want the best for him. I want the best for Caden Sterns. I hope that he goes on and continues to have a very successful NFL career, and I hope he makes the Broncos look stupid, because even though I agree with this move, I want these players to succeed. I want these guys to become great humans. I want the NFL to be a great product ultimately. I would be surprised if he couldn't find his way on a roster elsewhere, just due to the fact that he is a good player. He is legitimately a good player when he is healthy. And, maybe he's not going to be an all-pro or anything like that, but he can give you very serviceable production. And something like that for a team that's still, trying to develop secondary talent could be very, very useful. And all I can say is that the safeties on the roster better step up. You are giving a testament to those new safeties, as I've already talked about: Skinner, Locke, Key, and in some way Brandon Jones. But if they cannot do what the Broncos are expected of them, then the team is going to look foolish for letting a move like this happen. And ultimately, once again, it remains to be seen how this move will age for the Denver Broncos, but I hope it ages well because there's a lot of questions in the secondary besides your CB1 spot. Besides Patrick Surtain, you still have questions as to if it's going to be Levi Wallace, Riley Moss, or Damari Mathis. Any of those three would not surprise me. I hope it's Riley Moss just because I hope the investment that they did put into him was worth it. I hope ultimately they look smart for doing that. I hope their investments justified, everything of that nature. Now, I also hope that they can figure out, I hope they establish their safeties going into next year because, I assume it's going to be a 3-man rotation between Jones, Locke, and JL Skinner, obviously. And JL Skinner, who missed pretty much a lot of last season with a torn pectoral muscle, but he fell in the draft because he had an injury, and I think he would have gone a lot sooner had he not had that injury happen. So he could be the Broncos' diet version of Kyle Hamilton, so I'm really excited about him. But yeah, all I can say is the safeties on the roster, they better step up, and hopefully they make the Broncos look smart. Hopefully they make Vance Joseph look smart. Hopefully they make the team look good. So yeah, that's it for me, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.